Montana Territory. October 1883. The wind came first, loud and mean over the high plains, and by the time the thunder cracked, Fiona Tilden was already outside with her lantern, skirts soaked and sticking to her legs. She had seen the horse stumble in the field behind her cabin, seen the rider slump sideways in the saddle before falling hard into the mud. She did not think, only moved. "Easy now," she said, kneeling beside him. Rain hit her face in sheets. "Can you hear me?" The man groaned, blood trailing from his temple, soaking into the collar of his coat. His eyes fluttered open, blue and dazed. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse. "My land," she answered, shifting her weight to get under his arm. "You were lucky you got this far. Can you walk?" "Not sure," he muttered. Somehow she got him inside. He was taller than he looked in the rain, all lean muscle and bone and half-frozen. She dropped him onto the cot by the stove, stripped off his coat, and saw the blood on his shoulder. "Who did this?" she asked, already reaching for the scissors. "Did not catch their name," he said, grimacing. The wound was deep but not fresh. A few days old, by the look of it angry red and likely infected. She worked in silence, cleaning it, stitching it with steady hands. He gritted his teeth but did not cry out. When she finished, she covered him with a wool blanket and pushed a cup of hot tea into his hand. "You were lucky I was out there," she said. He looked at her through the steam, eyes clearer now. "I am beginning to think so too." She raised an eyebrow. "You got a name?" He hesitated, then said, "Callum." "Callum what?" "Just Callum." She exhaled sharply through her nose. "Fine. You can keep your secrets. But if you bleed on my floor again, I will toss you back into the storm." He smiled, tired but genuine. "Fair enough." She turned back to the fire, arms crossed tight over her chest. Callum watched her from the cot, tall, strong, with eyes like the storm still raging outside. He had not seen a woman like her before. Not out here. Not in years. She was not soft. She moved like someone who had been through worse than bad weather. Her hands were steady, her jaw set. There was something about her, something that told him she had known a long stretch of solitude. He drifted into sleep, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft movements of her cleaning up. For the first time in days, he felt safe. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silver frost on the grass and a world that looked quieter than it had the day before. Callum tried to sit up, but pain shot through his shoulder. "Do not be stupid," Fiona said, appearing in the doorway with a bowl of oatmeal. "You are not going anywhere." He frowned. "I need to get back. My horse." "Your horse is fine, grazing out back." "You were the one who nearly died." He took the bowl from her, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you." She nodded, sitting across from him. "Who were you running from?" He hesitated. "A man I used to trust." She held his gaze. "That wound says it was more than just a disagreement." He looked down at the oatmeal. "My family owns land. A lot of it. Down near Red Lodge. Some folks do not like that." She blinked. "You are for money?" He gave a short laugh. "My father is. I left it behind a while ago." "Why?" Callum met her eyes again. "Because I did not want to be that kind of man." Fiona stared at him, quiet for a beat. Then she stood. "You need rest, not talk." But her mind was turning. A rich man's son, wounded and alone in a storm, left to die. What kind of life had he run from? And why? Over the next 3 days, Callum healed slowly. Fiona made him broth, cleaned his stitches, and brought him books to read from the shelf her late father had built. They spoke in pieces about the land, her goats, the weather, never about the past. But in the silences, something grew. One night, as the fire burned low, he asked, "You out here on your own?" She nodded, eyes on the flames. "Been that way 2 years now. No family, gone. Fever took my father. My mother passed when I was young." He watched her, something tightening in his chest. "That is a heavy kind of quiet to live with. I got used to it. You should not have to." She looked over at him. "Neither should you." He did not answer. Instead, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. She let him, By the end of the week, he was walking again. She found him outside fixing the fence line with one arm, stubborn and sweating despite the cold. "You are going to pop your stitches," she said. He smiled. "I cannot just sit and do nothing." She handed him a water tin. "I have lived alone long enough to know that kind of restlessness." He looked at her. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Fiona leaned against the fence post. "I did once, but I never had a reason to." He stared at her for a long moment. "Maybe now you do." The wind picked up, tugging at her scarf. Her cheeks flushed pink, but she did not look away. "I might," she said. That night, Callum stood by the stove, watching her move around the cabin. He had known women before, flirted in town, kissed behind barns, but this was different. This was steady and real, the kind of pull that did not go away. He stepped closer. "Fiona." She turned. "I am not just some traveler passing through." "I know. I meant what I said. About not wanting to be like my father. I do not want that life. I want something real." Her breath caught, but she nodded. "So do I." He reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. "Then let me stay. Here. With you." Her eyes softened. "You sure about that?" "More than I have ever been about anything." She leaned into his touch, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then stay." And when he kissed her, it was not rushed or wild, it was slow and certain, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise. The storm had passed, and something better had begun. By mid-October, the frost lingered past sunrise and the days drew shorter. Callum had taken to waking before dawn, slipping from the cot and pulling his boots on with care not to wake Fiona. He'd feed the goats before she stirred, stack wood near the stove, and check the traps along the tree line for hare. His shoulder still ached, but the pain was dull now, manageable. It gave him something to push against. One morning, as the sky paled to ash blue, he returned to find Fiona standing at the basin, sleeves rolled to the elbow, grinding lye soap between her hands. Her hair was pinned up, a few strands loose at her neck. She glanced over as he came in, eyes trailing over his coat, damp at the hem. "You're tracking in mud." He toed off his boots near the door. "There's a hare in the pack. Caught near the creek bed." She nodded, rinsed her hands, and reached for a towel. "We'll salt what we don't eat tonight." Callum moved to the hearth, warming his fingers near the flame. "You ever sell pelts in town?" "Twice a month if the weather holds." She dropped the towel onto a hook by the window. "I trade at the Mercantile in Judith Crossing. They know me there." He turned. "That's 2 days south. Day and a half if you ride early." He studied her face, the way her jaw tightened when she mentioned it. "You go alone?" "Always have." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You don't have to anymore." She met his gaze, quiet but steady. "You offering to come?" "If you'll have me." Fiona nodded once. "We leave at first light." They rode out under a sky the color of tin, the wind dry and sharp. Fiona led without hesitation, her mare sure-footed even on the narrow trail that wound along the ridge. Callum kept pace behind her, his gelding favoring the left leg but holding up. They made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods midway through the second day. Fiona built the fire while Callum unsaddled the horses, rubbing them down with hands grown familiar with the work. She handed him a tin cup of coffee as the sun dropped behind the hills, casting everything in gold. "You always travel light," he said, nodding at the small bedroll and single satchel. "No sense in taking more than you can carry." He sipped, watching the fire catch. "You've been on your own a long time." She looked at him, her mouth set in a line, but not unkind. "I stopped expecting anyone else to stay." Callum's voice was low. "You still expect that?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I stopped thinking about it." He set his cup down carefully. "I'm not leaving, Fiona." She didn't answer right away. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers rough and warm against his. "I suppose we'll see." The next morning, they rode into Judith Crossing just as the sun crested the hills. The town was small, a string of clapboard buildings hugging the river bend. A few men leaned on railings outside the saloon, and a cart full of apples clattered past them, driven by a boy no older than 12. Fiona tied her mare outside the Mercantile. "Wait here if you like." I won't be long. He dismounted beside her. I'll come. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of flour and kerosene. The shopkeeper, a short man with steel-rimmed spectacles, looked up and smiled. Miss Tilden. Wasn't expecting you so soon. Had extra pelts to move, she said, laying them across the counter. The man's gaze flicked to Callum, then back to Fiona. New hand? Something like that. Callum gave a nod. The shopkeeper didn't press. When they stepped back outside, Fiona carried a wrapped bundle of supplies, her face unreadable. You all right? Callum asked. She adjusted the strap on the pack. Folks in town don't ask questions, but they remember faces. He glanced down the street. That a problem? Not today. They camped again that night, this time by a long stretch of grass near the river. Fiona stood with her hands in her coat pockets, watching the water move. Callum came to stand beside her. You're not used to having someone else watch your back. No, he looked out at the darkening sky. I wasn't either. Until now. She turned to him. Why'd you really leave your family? You said you didn't want their life, but that's not all of it. He hesitated. Then, my father wanted me to marry into a ranching family, combine lands, grow his holdings. Did you love her? I didn't even know her. I said no. He said I wasn't his son anymore. Fiona took a breath. That's a hard thing to hear. I figured I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and someone I couldn't stand. She reached out, brushing his coat sleeve with her fingers. You're not poor, Callum. You're just not owned. The fire crackled behind them and somewhere nearby, an owl called once into the dusk. He turned to her, stepping in close. Tell me something no one else knows. She looked up at him, the river light catching in her eyes. When I was 18, I almost left for St. Louis. I had a ticket and everything. Then my father got sick. I burned a letter from the rail office the same day. He didn't speak, just touched his forehead to hers. You'd have made it there, he said softly. She closed the space between them with the smallest tilt of her mouth. And this time when they kissed, it was deeper, more certain. No storm, no fear, just the steady promise of something solid. And in the quiet after, as the stars came out one by one, neither of them felt the chill. They returned to Fiona's homestead under a sky the color of burnt cream, the air brittle with the promise of snow. The goats greeted them with soft bleats, and the scent of pine smoke drifted from the chimney, faint but familiar. Callum dismounted stiffly, his shoulder tight from the ride, and took the saddlebags inside while Fiona checked the stores. Later, she found him by the woodpile, splitting kindling with slow, deliberate strokes. He had shed his coat, shirt sleeves rolled, face half-shadowed in the fading light. She leaned against the post, arms crossed. There's a letter in the bundle we brought back, she said. Wasn't addressed to me. It was tucked inside a copy of the Gazette. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. Who's it for? Says it's from someone named Nora out of Miles City. She watched him closely. She's asking if her brother made it as far as Red Lodge. Said he left after a quarrel with their father. Said his name was Callum. The axe stopped midair, then lowered. She wrote that. She did. He set the axe aside carefully and turned to face her. Nora's my sister. Fiona didn't blink. Why didn't you tell me you had someone still looking for you? I didn't think she'd forgive me for leaving. He looked down at his hands. I was wrong. Fiona reached into her coat pocket and handed him the folded paper. You should write her back. He nodded, slow and solemn. I will. That night, the wind shifted, blowing in low and steady from the north. Fiona added another log to the fire and poured hot water into a basin for washing. Callum leaned against the doorframe, letter in hand, his voice quiet. I used to think I had to choose between being someone's son and being myself. She didn't interrupt. But this place you've made me think maybe I don't have to give up everything to have something good. She wrung out the cloth, steam rising around her fingers. You're not the only one who's learning. He stepped closer. What are you learning? That it's all right to want more than just getting through the day. He touched her arm. Then let's want something together. She looked at him, long and clear, and didn't look away. In the days that followed, they settled into a rhythm that felt new without being fragile. Callum repaired the broken hinge on the barn door and cleared out the root cellar. Fiona began stitching a second quilt, one with deep red squares and pale blue borders. One morning, as the sun fought through a spill of cloud, Callum hitched the wagon and loaded it with firewood and seed sacks. "Where are you taking that?" Fiona asked, stepping into her boots. "To the McCarthy's place. You told me they've got 5 kids and no father. Winter's coming on fast." She studied him. "You don't owe them anything." "I know." She nodded once. "I'll ride with you." It was nearly midday by the time they reached the McCarthy homestead. The children ran out barefoot, cheeks bright with cold, and their mother's eyes welled when Callum handed her the last of the flour. On the ride home, Fiona was quiet. Finally, she said, "You didn't hesitate back there." "Not once." He kept his eyes on the trail. "I spent a long time thinking about who I didn't want to be. Feels better doing something than just talking about it." She reached across the seat and covered his hand with hers. That evening, snowfall began in earnest, soft and steady. Fiona lit the oil lamp and pulled the curtains closed while Callum stoked the stove. The cabin filled with warmth and the faint scent of beeswax. He sat across from her at the table, a pen in hand and the letter to Nora nearly finished. "She'll want to meet you," he said, glancing up. Fiona didn't smile, but there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Then she'd better come in spring. The pass will be closed by next week." Callum folded the page. "I'll send it out with the next rider heading north." She stood and crossed to him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You're not going back to them, are you?" He looked up at her, steady and sure. "No. I've already found what I was looking for." She bent down and kissed his temple. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the prairie in white. And for the first time in memory, the silence between them held nothing but peace. By early November, the ground held the snow through sunrise. The days narrowed into pale slivers of light, and smoke curled steady from the chimney, announcing warmth inside where the world had turned harsh and white. On one such morning, Fiona stood at the window, drying her hands on a wool cloth. The frost etched the glass in delicate veins, and through it, she watched Callum walking toward the barn with a length of rope over his shoulder. His gait had evened out, shoulder-stiff still, but no longer hampered. The cold didn't seem to trouble him. She knew it wasn't just the coat or the work that kept him warm. He came back just as she finished buttoning her overskirt. "Fence rail broke near the west edge," he said, brushing snow from his collar. "Could be elk, maybe a bull wandered low." She reached for her gloves. "We'll go see it together." They saddled the horses without much talk. The stillness between them had shifted in recent weeks, not empty, not tense, but full, like a field left fallow with purpose, something growing deep beneath. Riding side by side, their breath fogged the air in bursts. The horses picked their way through the snow-crusted grass, hooves muffled against the earth. At the western edge of the property, the fence sagged under a rough break where something heavy had pushed through. Callum crouched to study the tracks, one hand steadying himself against the post. "Not an elk," he said. "Too wide. Could be a steer got loose from someone's herd." Fiona scanned the horizon. "There's no one running cattle this far north this season." He stood, brushing snow from his trousers. "Then someone's strayed. Or someone's hiding." Fiona didn't ask what he meant. She knew the kinds of men who followed others into quiet places, pretending they weren't hunting. They rode the perimeter in silence, eyes sharp. By midday, they returned to the cabin, horses steaming slightly from the ride. Fiona stripped off her gloves and laid them near the stove to dry. "You think it's someone looking for you?" she asked. He leaned against the doorframe. "Hard to say. I left clean, but money makes men foolish." She lit a second lamp, setting it on the table. "We'll take shifts watching the ridge for a few days." He nodded but didn't move. She turned then, catching the hesitation in his shoulders. What is it? I've seen what happens when men come through places like this, looking for someone to punish. He looked at her fully now. If something happens, I don't want you caught in the middle. Fiona crossed the room, stopping only when they were close enough to feel each other's breath. You think I'd send you out alone? I think I'd rather take the risk than let them touch what you've built. Her voice came quieter. You're part of what I've built now. He didn't answer, just reached out and cradled her face in one calloused hand, his thumb rough against her cheekbone. They stood there for a long time, nothing between them but the crackle of the stove and the sound of their breath. That night, Callum took the first watch from the porch, wrapped in his coat, rifle resting across his lap. Fiona sat just inside the door, mending a tear in the hem of her winter skirt. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. By morning, no sign of movement had come, but the tracks near the fence line still hadn't faded. The next day, Fiona rode into the hills alone with a pair of binoculars and a sack of feed, using the pretense of checking traps. From the ridge, she spotted a curl of campfire smoke near the edge of the tree line, too far from town, too close to her land. When she returned, cheeks red from the wind, Callum was waiting, saddle cinched, rifle strapped beneath his leg. I saw them, she said, sliding from her mount. One man, maybe two, camped near the eastern bluff. His jaw worked tight. Then I go tonight. You're not going alone. He stepped toward her. You're not coming. She didn't flinch. You don't get to decide that. He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. They left after dark, cutting across frozen fields where the moon lit everything in pewter. The horses moved slow, sure-footed, ears twitching with each shift of wind. At the edge of the bluff, they dismounted, tying off the reins beneath a line of pine. Callum moved ahead, silent as snowfall, Fiona just behind him. They found the camp on the south slope. A single tent, a dying fire, and one horse tethered nearby. Callum crouched low. Not hired men, he whispered. No discipline. Poor fire control. Fiona pulled her knife from her boot. Looks like a gambler's camp. Maybe a drifter. They waited an hour, watching. When the man stirred, stepping into the firelight, Callum's whole body went still. Fiona leaned in. You know him? He nodded once. From back home. His name's Gresham. Worked for my father. He's not here on accident. They moved as one, stepping out from the dark. Gresham startled, but Callum called his name low and firm. Drop it. I'm not going back. The man raised his hands. Don't want you back. Just came for the deed papers. Your father thinks you took them. Callum's voice didn't waver. I didn't. And even if I had, they'd be ash by now. Gresham laughed, sharp and thin. He said you'd say that. Fiona stepped forward, blade still in hand. He's not your problem anymore. You're on private land. You leave tonight, or you leave in a box. Gresham looked between them, eyes narrowed. So this is what you gave it all up for? A goat farm and a woman with a knife. Callum didn't move. No. I gave it up so I could look in the mirror and not want to break it. She just made it worth it. Gresham spat into the fire, then bent to pack his few things. You won't see me again. But your father's got a long memory. Callum didn't watch him go. He just waited until the hoofbeats faded into the dark. They rode home slow, neither speaking. The cold bit deeper now, but it didn't get inside them. Once they reached the cabin, Callum unsaddled the horses while Fiona stoked the fire. When he came in, she handed him a mug of coffee, hands brushing for only a moment. He set it aside and pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. No one's coming between us, he said. Her voice was steady. They wouldn't survive trying. And in the hush of the deep night, with the stove humming and the snow falling soft outside, they stood in the center of what they'd chosen together, unafraid. The snow lingered well into December, dry and powder fine, blanketing the hills in silence. Each morning, Fiona broke the ice on the water trough with the back of a shovel, her breath curling in front of her. Callum joined her without being asked, his coat patched now where it had worn thin, shoulders broad beneath the wool. They moved easily beside one another, each knowing what needed doing before the other had to speak. The fence held through the last storm. Nothing more stirred near the bluff, and no one else came asking questions. Still, they kept a rifle mounted above the door and their boots near the hearth just in case. One evening, Callum stepped inside, cheeks ruddy from the cold, and held out a small wooden box. "I've been working on something out in the lean-to," he said. "Meant it for the first day of snow, but winter got ahead of me." Fiona dried her hands on her apron, tilting her head. "You carving now?" He set the box on the table. It was smooth-grained pine, sanded clean, and fitted with a brass hinge scavenged from the old barn door. Inside, nestled in a square of linen, lay a simple ring, silver, polished, its surface plain but solid. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "Found the silver in the old stash you keep under the floorboards. Figured it wasn't doing much good there." Fiona touched the metal, eyes unreadable. "I know it's not fancy," he said, "but I want to make a life here with you, not just stay. Build it together." She closed the lid, resting her hand on the smooth top. "I never thought I'd want that again. Not after I buried my father. Not after all that silence." Callum waited. "I do want it," she said. "With you." That night, they sat on the floor near the stove, the quilt she'd been stitching wrapped around them. She leaned into his side, and he rested his chin lightly against her temple. "You ever think about what we'll do come spring?" she asked. "Thought about repairing the well house. Starting a new plot behind the barn." "I meant longer than that." He laced his fingers through hers. "Then I've thought about adding a second room to the cabin. Maybe a glass window if we can trade for one." She was quiet a moment. "There's more land east, past the ridge. My father once talked about grazing goats there. I never cleared it." "We'll clear it," he said. "Together." They didn't speak of his father again. Whatever claim the man thought he had was gone with the thawing snow and the last tracks of Gresham's retreat. Callum sent the letter to Nora weeks before, and though the trail would be closed until May, they both knew she'd come when she could. In late January, Fiona caught a fever that burned for 2 days. Callum stayed at her side through it, soaking cloths in melted snow, coaxing broth into her mouth when she could take it. When her strength returned, she found him asleep with his head resting on the edge of the bed, hands still wrapped around hers. "You look like hell," she rasped. He opened one eye. "You're one to talk." She smiled for the first time in days, and when he kissed her forehead, she didn't pull away. By March, the first milk came, slow and steady. The creek ran stronger, and the goats began to wander farther from the shed. Fiona planted early spinach and onions, while Callum built a new frame for the hutch she'd been meaning to expand. The work was hard and clean. Their hands stayed busy, their sleep deep. One morning, she stood in the doorway, brushing flour off her skirt, and watched him hammer a beam into place. The sun caught the edge of his jaw, and she felt something settle inside her, not a rush, not a spark, but a steadiness, like the earth itself had agreed to hold them. "You ever think we'll have children?" she asked later, as they sat on the porch steps with coffee. He turned to her, surprised but not afraid. "You want that?" "I think I might. Not now, but someday." He nodded slowly. "Then we will." She leaned against him. "Seems like we're real good at building what we didn't plan for." He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe that's the only way anything worth keeping gets built." The ground turned soft and green by the time the first letter came from Nora. She'd be arriving by summer, she wrote, and hoped to meet the woman her brother had chosen. Fiona folded the letter and tucked it into the box with the ring, still waiting for the right day. That day came in June, when the first lilacs bloomed beside the cabin. Fiona stood barefoot in the grass, her dress simple, hair loose for the first time in months. Callum stood beside her, shirt pressed, hands clean. They exchanged vows beneath the oak her father once planted, with Nora holding a bouquet of prairie clover and goat bells. There were no guests beyond the land itself, and that was enough. That evening, they danced in the clearing while Nora played fiddle, the goats curious but uninterested. The sky blazed orange and gold, and the wind carried the scent of wild thyme across the ridge. Later, as the last light faded and the stars came alive, Callum pulled Fiona close beneath the old quilt and whispered, "We made it." She touched his face, traced the crease at the corner of his eye with her thumb. "And we'll keep making it." He nodded, voice low. "Every day." And they did, through dry seasons, through hard winters, through every small joy and sorrow that stitched the years together. They planted more. They mended what broke. They laughed and fought and held on. And they never left. Because some homesteads are not just built from timber and stone, but from the quiet choosing of one another, again and again, until the land itself remembers your names.